It's great to welcome to the program today Bill Adair, the Knight Professor of Journalism and Public Policy at Duke University, also the founder of the fact-checking site PolitiFact, and author of the book Beyond the Big Lie, The Epidemic of Political Lying, Why Republicans Do It More, and How It Could Burn Down Our Democracy. Bill, there's so much in the book that I want to talk about. I think maybe as a place to start, you know what? Have had this instinct that political lying has changed since you founded PolitiFact. And as I've explained before to my audience, not completely articulately, there is some kind of difference between, making a very calculated statement about the change in the deficit over a particular period of time to make it seem like it's either gone up or down as politically advantageous with, changing a hurricane map with a Sharpie, for example, something that seems much more empirically incorrect. Can you characterize in some way how political lying has changed over time?
Yeah, great question, David. I think what's happened is the lies have gotten bigger and bolder, and there's less friction for them. So when I started PolitiFact in 2007, I would say that there was more reluctance on the part of politicians, particularly in the Republican Party, to lie. And I think when you called out politicians, even in the Republican Party, there was a sense of, oh my gosh, you caught me. Yeah, we'll fix it. I remember talking to elected officials back then, and they would be like, "Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, we'll fix that," and they would issue a correction. They would acknowledge their mistake, whatever. And I think what's happened, particularly with Donald Trump, is that it has emboldened a lot of politicians to just lie without any concern, that they realize they can get away with it. Their media, particularly on the right, the conservative media, um, looks the other way, or even feeds the lies, because as we saw in the Dominion voting case, that it it pays off for an organization like Fox to repeat the lies, because otherwise it Fox lost its audience. And so it's really troubling what's happened. And as I interviewed people for the book, it was things got worse, and it's quite discouraging.
To think back to the whole Haitian immigrants eating dogs thing, they're eating the cats, they're eating the dogs, as Donald Trump would say. That was interesting in this context because initially they sort of defended it as no, we do believe that that's true. There was a picture of a black guy carrying two dead geese, and it was like that was actually not a Haitian migrant. It was just a city employee in Ohio. And then they weren't talking about geese, they were talking about cats and dogs, but they tried to kind of defend it on the facts. And then when they couldn't do that, J.D. Vance kind of retreated to, listen, we'll fabricate stories to get the media to pay attention to what we believe they should be paying attention to. And both explanations seemed to be accepted by the people that at the time were supporting that campaign, which was if you give us some cover to continue claiming it's true, we'll go with that. If you can't defend it on the facts and you say, because everybody's against us, the media, this, that, we will then defend exaggerating or fabricating stories. And it seems that that is an environment in which there is no downside to just making stuff up. Is there no downside in that sense?
At this moment, I'm afraid there isn't. And I do, in Beyond the Big Lie, have some thoughts about how we can change this, and we can talk about those. But at this moment, I'm afraid that there are an awful lot of enablers, or at least people and media organizations that look the other way. And it's just amazing to me, David, like how did this happen? How did journalism organizations that really are no longer journalism organizations, they're propagandists, um, allow this to happen, to just pass along these falsehoods without any concern? And it's really troubling. You recounted exactly what happened in Ohio, and it's uh, they were just shameless about it. And I I um I found the whole thing just day after day that it just got worse and worse and worse. And there doesn't seem to be a political consequence now. We need to change that.
The next layer has also been attacking the concept of fact checking as biased in and of itself. And there were struggles with the debate negotiations, for example. Will or won't moderators fact check? And the two fact checks during the ABC debate that the Trump campaign said that it was fact checking that was biased because those were the two things that were selected. Alternative facts, the idea that even the concept of fact checking is in and of itself blurry. Talk about, especially through PolitiFact, because that's an organization that has also been targeted, I would say more by Republicans than Democrats with regard to the concept of fact checking, what you choose to fact check and what you exclude. Even that as an idea is now being attacked, which interestingly to me sounds very much like the postmodernism that they claim to oppose, where everything, you people on the left say anything can mean anything, but now they're saying, well, even fact, what does it mean to fact check?
It's just very convenient, isn't it? That when you're called out for lies, to then say that the people who are calling you out for lies are biased. And we faced that since the beginning, and the fact checkers have not been able to stand up for themselves because to do so would acknowledge the reality that there was more lying from the Republican Party. And so the fact
Mm.
checkers have been reluctant to do that and very cautious because they want to appear impartial. So what I did with the book was talk about this for the first time, now that I'm no longer affiliated with PolitiFact. Um, but it's just very convenient. My analogy for it is now, as a professor at Duke University, I understand this because I'm a basketball fan and I know that the referees in college basketball are all biased against Duke. And they're always calling fouls against Duke, and it's just always the case. And so that's unfortunately the reality that we have in American politics. You're always calling out my team, therefore you're biased. And so, but the reality is that there's just so much more lying on the right. There's so much more lying on the right from the conservative media. And it's created a terrible situation in our country that makes it really difficult to have a serious conversation about issues such as immigration, climate change, crime. We just can't have serious conversations because there's no agreement on facts. And we need to turn that around.
In my forthcoming book, I talk about a Pew study that was done wherein people were given 10 statements and were told to identify which of these are statements of opinion and which are statements of fact. And although Republicans did a little worse on it, neither group did particularly well, which seems to be, as it connects to media literacy and critical thinking, part of the issue that has allowed the lying to maybe be more successful, which is there seems to be some core inability or limitation when people see a statement, chocolate ice cream is the best type of ice cream. And they might say, well, if I can demonstrate it's the most popular, maybe that statement is true. And it's like, no, that still wouldn't make it a statement of fact. It's still a statement of opinion. That structural problem must be playing into this, at least to some degree.
Oh, I agree. And I think, but a challenge there is our so much of what is happening in our educational system is it's the um, many conservatives don't want to fund things that would teach people how to be smarter about consuming media.
Yes,
That really what we need is media literacy,
right.
and that's something that people have tried in some states with some success. California and Illinois, there's been some serious proposals that have gotten, particularly in Illinois, I know have passed.
Right.
But in other states, that's a dream because there's just so much opposition from Republicans. But that's what we need to get that critical thinking about how people consume media and get students to understand how to read things with skepticism, how to know what to trust, how to know what not to trust.
There's an incredible little news story about critical thinking being taught to pretty young kids in Finland in Spanish as part of Spanish class. And every time I see that, it's just we are really behind here in a lot of different ways.
Absolutely.
What can you talk a little bit about some of the solutions for reducing the incentive for, and I guess just in general, dishonesty in politics?
You bet. And this, and these are pretty bold ideas. But I think we have to think bold here. And so what I tried to do in the book was think about, well, what is the incentive for politicians to lie? And then how might we attack that? How might we create um, disincentives or incentives to tell the truth? And so I
Yeah.
came up with a few that are sort of outside the box. One is to take an idea from the Republicans themselves, which is the idea of a pledge. Republicans, Republican politicians often sign a pledge not to raise taxes. This is handled by Americans for Tax Reform, a group run by a guy named Grover Norquist.
Hmm.
If you did something similar about lying, did sort of a pledge not to lie, it wouldn't be enforced by any government. It would just be a pledge that then other politicians would talk about. Hey, my opponent won't sign the pledge not to lie. Journalists would also get people to enforce it. I think that could have an impact. There's no reason that the Republican Party couldn't become the party of truth. Right now, we'd be appalled at that, but that's possible. And the Republican Party could change its whole approach by adopting something like that. Another one, and this is a little more far-fetched, particularly in light of what Meta has done recently with fact checkers, but would be to charge differential rates for advertising to politicians that had worse records for fact checking. But it doesn't have to be Meta, it could be other social media platforms, it could be the companies that run the ad networks, and they could charge differential rates to politicians that had better or worse rates, that had better or worse records for fact checking. Politicians need advertising to reach their voters. And so that's one way that could really create some disincentives for lying.
One of the issues in general with this whole concept is that if you, I think if you asked people who tend to be on the left, why is it that Republicans lie more? A simple explanation would be the truth about what they support would be unappealing to voters. Therefore, they must lie about it. However, if you asked the right about it, if you even got them to acknowledge that some of these are exaggerations, distortions, whatever, I think part of their argument would be because everything is stacked against us, popular culture is stacked against us, corporate media is stacked against us, online, social media, it's all stacked against us. We have no choice, as J.D. Vance said during the campaign, to contrive and fabricate stories. And it seems to me that if we can't even get an agreement on the basics of why some of these things are happening, it'll be difficult to get buy-in from the people who do the most lying to any idea, the ones that you're talking about or others, because they will say until we fix the structural bias against us, why would we agree to anything that you propose?
Yeah, and I wish that, but of course, to do that, they, I guess, would have to acknowledge that they're lying, which they
True.
won't do.
Right.
But I, I wonder, if you could conduct an experiment where you said, um, absent lying, would a substantial number of people still support their policies on immigration maybe, like
Right.
I don't know, like I mean they're sort of fundamental um their fundamental factual claims about immigration to some extent are all false, or not all, but many of them are false. Like, do immigrants commit more crimes?
Right.
No, they don't. So that sort of fundamental, um, hey, they're coming to steal from you, they need to go back. They're going to take your jobs. Well, you know, I don't think the facts totally support that. I mean, I think there's shades of gray on that one. So it would be interesting on a level playing field how much their immigration policies would stand up. A lot of people might still support it. Hey, this is we'd like tighter immigration policies, but um, it's too bad that we can't have that honest conversation.
One other thing I want to mention, which is I think that implicit in some of the resistance to acknowledge maybe what fact checkers would agree on as the empirical truth comes that on some level, some of these Republicans know that if they just acknowledge the facts, it must then point to a certain policy, which they don't like. And what I mean by that is some of the resistance for a long time to acknowledge the science of climate change was not because they genuinely didn't believe it, but because if you acknowledge it, they assumed it means we must enact certain policies that they don't like. And, maybe it does or maybe it doesn't. I tend to think that if we could just get on the same page as to whether it's happening, then we debate what the policy should be. It doesn't necessarily have to mean your stakes in SUVs get taken away. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. I don't know. But I think implicit in some of the immigration stuff, if they acknowledge actually immigrants don't commit more crime, it undermines a lot of the policy they want. And I don't know how we fix that, which is let's agree on the facts first without assuming what the policy would be. We can then debate the policy, but I think they know that some of these things, it's so obvious, maybe to a degree, that some of the policy proposals don't make sense if they agree to what the facts are, that it creates a roadblock to even really establishing the facts, if that makes sense.
Yeah, great boy, great point. And I remember covering Congress when there were Republicans who were um, open-minded on immigration and believed that there were um, paths to citizenship that they could support. Excuse me, like a bill that would create ways that uh, immigrants who were already here could be granted citizenship with some restrictions. They might have to go back and then return. And those Republicans have long ago abandoned those policies
Yep.
because anything like that became unacceptable in this fact-starved environment.
The book is Beyond the Big Lie: The Epidemic of Political Lying, Why Republicans Do It More, and How It Could Burn Down Our Democracy. We've been speaking with the book's author, Bill Adair. Bill, thank you so much for your time today.
You bet. Thank you so much for having me.